two questions. What is God doing? And therefore, what do we do? What is God doing? He has revealed his glory among the nations, meaning in Jesus, and that God is at work in the world. What we prayed for is that God would preserve the work of his mercy, that the church throughout the world may persevere. In other words, and it's a very carefully chosen collect, as all of them are, actually. Because the writer could have said a number of other things. Preserve the works of your power, that the gospel may be preached to the ends of the earth. Preserve the legacy of those who have gone before us in faith, that we too may be faithful heirs to that which has been given to us in our generation. You can kind of go on and on and on, thinking about other things that may not have reached the top of your list, as opposed to preserve the works of your mercy. But the collect is chosen because it says something that we believe is like the ground underneath our feet. That whoever we are in Christ Jesus, whatever God has done in us, whatever God is doing in the world, whatever God has revealed in Jesus, it is all mercy. Every single bit of it. I am not a debtor to my own accomplishments in the end. I am a debtor to the mercy of God. I am a debtor to his work in my life, entirely undeserved, both in changing you and me, but also allowing us to be a vessel that changes and makes a difference in the life of another person. That also being an act of God's mercy. In other words, none of us qualify, and thank God we don't have to. Nor, and this is important, do we have to try to prove ourselves before God. There is, you see, a temptation of acknowledging that it is an act of mercy that I've been received into his kingdom, but now I better get busy. And while there is a work that we are called to do, it is never ever meant to in any way justify our existence. Our existence has been already justified in the mercy that we have been shown in Jesus Christ. Period. End of story. And so, what that's meant to do is work in us a kind of, wow, you mean I'm free? I don't have to prove myself to you. I don't really have to prove myself to anybody. I can become the person that God has intended me to be. Because it's all an act of his mercy anyway. And even though I just may mess up in the largest ways possible in trying to somehow serve the one who has been so merciful, the fact of the matter is that's actually okay on the front end. Because that's assumed. Because it's always mercy. It's always mercy. It's never not mercy. See? So there will always be this gap at one level between what I might think God might be expecting of me because of what it is that I have done, and what it is that I'm actually capable of performing. And the God who is gentle with us like a child never ever looks at us and just sort of says, okay, the walking doesn't look pretty good, but I'm not going to really be happy until you run a marathon. Get at it, 4-year-old. But unfortunately, because of the way we think about ourselves and the soup that we live in, which is always about trying to justify your existence by what you are doing. Always. It takes a certain level of ponder anew, using the line of the hymn, or even making the time to meditate on his law day and night, to quote the first psalm, to continue to ground us in the place of our identity. And then out of that, look at the behaviors which may or may not reflect that identity. But again, we're looking at the behaviors. This is the Romans 6 lesson. Not as a way of proving myself before God, but looking at how I might more fully live out the mercy that I have already received. And what in my life is consistent with that mercy? And what in my life instead is my multitasking, trying to get things done, prove myself, justify my existence, and let people know that I really am either worth my salary, or that I matter in some way, or that I've earned a place in this family and therefore you better hear me, or whatever thing like that we use. Which is why it really does take both the pondering, not just doing the next thing. For me, the phrase that's going on in my life right now, to reflect more deeply on that which I believe and know to be true. To get at least in my life, the distractedness that is so much a part of where my brain can so easily go. And so that for me, as I think about the passage, that's a part of what immediately arises to the surface, is trying to tackle and ask God to help me to tackle the capacity to be able to not just think the first thought and then go, but to sit more deeply and prayerfully to think the second thought and the third thought and the fourth thought that could take me in a very, very different direction than the first thought. Not a bad idea, but there may be some gold in there farther down the line if I'm willing to ponder that God is trying to create room in me to be able to receive. It's within that context that we look at the Romans lesson about not giving yourselves as slaves to sin, but sin to righteousness. And the exhortations that are so much a part of, that big, deep book that really is all about the fact that we've been justified by grace through faith. In other words, it's not that I'm willing to apply myself, but it's because I want to be a reflection in some way of the mercy of God. Not just to be better thought of, or the other things that we might apply to ourselves. The need to be needed. And it takes a step back and a reflection to look at our lives in a way that causes us to go, do I really need to look at that right now? Do I really need to send this email? Or whatever it might be that would actually pull me instead of stopping and being more inwardly directed in the life that God has given us. I want to be about the preserving of God's mercy as far as is possible, because that's what God is doing in the world. He is preserving his mercy. So where is it that I can reflect mercy? Where can I receive mercy? How can my life more adequately reflect that kind of strong, tender care? It's what God has done. It's what we are invited into, not to become a testimony to our own accomplishment, but to another sign that in the midst of people like you and me, God is doing something pretty amazing. Amen.